So just to remind you guys, I'm going to be moving through some of this faster, just because we've already covered some of it. And then I'm going to talk about sort of the difference between what's the details on here versus what we covered in the previous slides. And so we talked a bit about the process of changing behaviors and changing attitudes, right? So we talked about this process of creating dissonance. And so I asked you guys, do you think that solving world hunger, that world hunger is an issue? And do you think that it's important? Do you think that we should try to, solve world hunger? And everybody said, yes, of course, nobody should go hungry. And then I asked you the question, well, what do you do about it? Like, do you do anything actively on a consistent routine basis to try to solve world hunger? And a lot of you said, well, during holidays, I donate to the food bank, or I volunteer every now and then, but nobody was like consistently, yes, daily, weekly, I do something to try to end world hunger. And the idea is that I was trying to create dissonance here, where you have this idea where you say, I think this is important, but then your behaviors aren't reflecting your attitude about that thing, because the behaviors aren't consistent. So when we create dissonance, we're creating this feeling of uncomfortableness, right? And so this is the separation between your attitudes, your thought processes, and your feelings about something, and then how you behave. And so when your image is threatened, which is basically you you feel like, I want to be a good person and I want to, feel like I'm doing something, right? You start to try to find a justification for the fact that you perhaps don't do things daily or weekly or routinely to end world hunger. So because you always want to have this need to feel like you're a good person, and now your image is threatened, you're going to try to explain with external justifications. And when you can't find the right external justification or enough external justification, now you're trying to then turn it towards internal justification. So now you're trying to figure out, why is it that I don't do those things? And if you don't have enough external justification and you don't have enough internal justification, now you're going to either change your behavior, okay, which is bringing your attitude and your behaviors closer together, or you're going to change your attitude. And that is where you start to change your cognitions and you start to change that internal justification. Another thing that we can call this is this sort of counter-attitudinal advocacy, where you actually have a person publicly say out loud an opinion or attitude that runs counter to what they actually believe privately. And this does create dissonance. So let's say, for example, let's give the example that, let's say you have a significant other, like a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever, and that person, their dad has a particular political attitude, okay, or political belief. And so because you want to not create tension or arguments, that person might say something to you that you don't privately agree with, you don't really believe. Like, so if they have a particular, they're leaning toward a direction, whether they're leaning more right or leaning more left in terms of their political affiliation and their beliefs, and they talk to you about that, you might say, you might not outwardly say, oh, I don't agree with you. You might actually be like, yeah, that's a really good point. Now, privately, you don't believe that. Privately, you believe that, the complete opposite, perhaps. It's something completely counter to what you have just said out loud to that person. And because that creates uncomfortable feelings, this dissonance, right? Even though you're trying to say, well, I'm trying not to cause tension, but there comes a point where that external justification stops working, and it's not enough. So what ends up happening is this counter-attitudinal advocacy of where you're saying something counter to your private beliefs. If you do this enough, what ends up happening is that you start to privately believe the thing that you're saying out loud. If you have people say this enough, and state it enough, they start to kind of their opinion, their private opinion, doesn't hold as strong over time. And so that's because this private dissonance, this dissonance is causing you to actually change your attitude. So if you want somebody to change their private beliefs, a process is to have them publicly talk about something that's counter to what they believe, and over time they can actually warp their attitude and change their attitude. So that is a way that we can actually change attitudes. Another thing that you can do, and we talked a little bit about this already, is persuasive communication. We talked a little bit about, and I even mentioned like the Yale method, and I mentioned another one. We're going to kind of dive into these a little bit deeper. So when you have persuasive communication, we talked about like door in the face, foot in the door. We talked about, different techniques that you can get people to do things, get people to change their attitudes or give you something or anything like that. Whenever we have a persuasive communication that is trying to get you to think something or do something by the message that's being sent. And so any communication in this persuasive communication would be advocating a particular side, a particular issue, whatever it might be. And this might be a speech, it might be a television ad, it might be even a meme, it might be anything, a video, anything that's really kind of moving you to try to get you to buy into something, right? To think the same way. And so let's say we had a particular situation where, let's say you work for the American Cancer Society and you have to create a campaign to stop people from using dip or any kind of oral like tobacco product. So what is something that you would need to think about? What are some factors that you need to think about how you construct your message? Basically something that you guys learned previously, which is like that educating on how to quit, and then so giving them instructions on how to quit, but also educating them on the dangers. So this is using a mild amount of fear along with an educational instructions. How do you quit? So that can be very effective. Okay, I got another really good comment here. What is the largest demographic that uses the product? Who uses dip? So if it's teens, older men, middle-aged women, would it make sense for you to construct a message for people in their 80s, right? If that's not the demographic that even uses dip? What if you could create a series of TikToks for something that maybe your largest demographic is actually middle-aged white men? Is a TikTok campaign going to get at the largest demographic? Step one is who is your target audience, right? Who is your target audience? What are you saying? Who is saying this message? Does it matter who says this message? If you're working for the American Cancer Society and you create the public service announcement, right? Does it matter who is the one talking and giving the message? Does that matter? And why? Why would it matter? Okay, a good one here. I doubt an older person would listen to a teenager saying quitting dip is totes awesome, nor would a teenager listen to an old man saying do it for your kids. Absolutely. You want somebody who can relate to the message, right? You want somebody who maybe has been in a situation. So I've here somebody who is with experience and has quit themselves. When you're looking at a weight loss campaign, you want to see the before and after, right? You want to see people who have talking about testimonials. You want to see people who have been successful in the thing that you want to fix, right? More people may be interested in the American Cancer Society if there's a famous person hosting the events. Absolutely. And that famous person, that celebrity, has to be in line with your target demographic. So if your target demographic is, let's say, teen white males, let's say that's your biggest demographic using dip, or a big demographic using dip, choosing somebody that they know, choosing somebody that they'll maybe listen to or value or respect their opinions, that's going to be something that's much more persuasive than, picking, I don't know, some random actor or singer that that person has never ever heard of. They'll be like, who are you and why should I care about what you say? So this idea about persuasive communication, there's a whole field dedicated to this and dedicated to understanding what works and what doesn't. One of the approaches to getting people to do certain things and for in terms of persuasive communications, one of those is called the Yale attitude change approach. Now, I very briefly mentioned this in the other slides, but I'm going to go over this in a little bit more detail just so that you guys can understand how this approach works. And I got somebody in chat showing kids with cancer is very powerful emotional appeal. That's true, but remember that it doesn't work for everybody, right? So using emotion doesn't work for every message. Using pictures of certain kinds of people that a person can't relate to, even if it's a sad message. Again, some things don't work, and we'll talk about persuasive messages and how tailoring them to the type of attitude is also very important. So I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So the Yale attitude approach is all about looking at the conditions under which a person is going to change their attitudes and respond to a persuasive message. Okay. And so what this is figuring out this kind of breakdown is who said what to whom. Okay. And where this information kind of came from, where this approach came from is back in the late 40s, 1940s, there was some studies done looking at how people were building morale for US soldiers after World War II. And so they were trying to understand the conditions to which people would be most likely influenced by persuasion. So how can you build up morale in people? How can you get them to be happy with the decision, for example, to go to war or to join, to be in a military branch, things like that. And so what they were studying in this persuasive messages is who said what to whom. They were looking at the source of the communication. So in the case of how expert the person is, how attractive the person is, right? So who is actually giving the message is very important. The communication itself, the message itself, it has to be thinking about things like the quality of the argument. Does the presenter present both sides of the situation? Are they only limited to, just the side that they're trying to present, or are they trying to be more kind of the whole thing or a counter argument? Looking at the nature of the audience. Who is the target? Who are the people that you're targeting to communicate this message to? So, for example, looking at hostile audiences, kind audiences, quiet audiences, loud audiences, and what kind of appeals work for each one of these. And this right here is a really nice breakdown of how the Yale attitude change approach works. So here you can see, looking at who is communicating the message, what the message is, and to whom, the audience, this message is being created for. And so in order to look at all of these kind of elements, and I highly encourage you to take a few minutes to really read through this table, because it really gives a lot of good examples and information, really understanding the factors of which makes a persuasive message persuasive. And looking at those different factors, breaking those down, is going to help you understand what things you need to do in order to pick the right person to say the message, pick the right message to say, and also how you're going to cater that to your actual audience, because it needs to make sense for whom you're talking. If you're trying to get attitude change, behavioral change in first graders, right, you're going to make sure that that message is something that a first grader is going to understand and be able to pay attention to. So another one that we can talk about is the elaboration likelihood model. So again, this is another model of persuasion, which has a lot of the same concepts as the Yale attitude change approach, but it is just going into kind of a little bit more of how the persuasion actually occurs. Okay. So what this likelihood model is basically saying is that there's two routes where persuasive communications can cause attitude change. Okay. And so one route is the central route, which is that is going to result in much faster and more and stronger attitude change. Excuse me. And then the peripheral route, which is going to be you can engage in attitude change, but it tends to be kind of surface, right? And so the difference between the two is how much you're going to be influenced by what, let's say a speech, right? By what the speech is about, like what it says. So are you going to be influenced by the logic of the speech? And are you going to be influenced by superficial factors? For example, how attractive the person is, how long the speech is. If you're like, my God, this speech is an hour and a half long, this is taking way too much time, and you're not really paying attention and you're not really interested, then it's more likely to take the peripheral route. And that is, you're not really paying attention. You're swayed by surface characteristics because you're just like, oh, that person's really, really good looking. I'll believe whatever they say. Right. So these are definitely two routes where we can engage in persuasion. Let's see. So a little bit more information on the central route and peripheral route, and then we'll move to the next one, which is like a schematic of the two. So how you a person is elaborating on a persuasive communication is important. So it's the person who's listening. Are they paying attention? Okay. Are they listening carefully? Are they thinking about the arguments? Are they motivated and interested in the message? That's the question. If we can say that the person is motivated, they're carefully listening, they're really invested in the message, okay? If they're motivated to pay attention, they're going to be more persuaded when the argument is logical, when it's compelling, okay? And this is what we refer to as the central route or the central root of persuasion. So this is a much more involved and a much more elaborate route of persuasion. Okay. So central root, think of it just straight. You're paying attention as the audience. You're motivated. You're thinking critically. You're listening to the message. You're very focused. Okay. And you're invested and it's important to you. Okay. That's something that you will, that you're going to take the central route of persuasion. The peripheral route. So if the person is not really elaborating on the argument, if they're not thinking about it as the target, as the audience, right? They are they're sort of half paying attention. They're not really motivated. They're not really paying attention to the facts, right? They are maybe noticing only kind of the surface characteristics of the argument, maybe just like how long is it? Who's delivering it? Do they look attractive? Is it somebody they like? Is it somebody that has an annoying voice? Is this, what are the surface characteristics of this message? And here is that in this case, a person will be swayed, but not by the logic of the argument. They're not critically thinking. They're not really motivated about it. They're not really paying close attention to what the communicator says. So instead, they're persuaded by these surface characteristics. Is it something that is taking up too much of their time? Right? If it's a short message, if it's something that's real quick, then they might be like, oh, wow, that was a real quick message. I'll believe it. Right? So these are things, these surface characteristics, how long it is, how attractive the person is, who's giving it. So we like to think of it as a periphery, right? And that means that you're being swayed by the peripheral characteristics, not by central logical key factors in the argument itself. Okay. And so here's a schematic of it. So here is, here we have this person at a lectern, and they're giving this message, right? Thank you guys. So they're giving this message, and this is the person who's trying to persuade you. This is the persuasive communicator, right? And so they're saying, okay, here I am. I'm telling you all of this information. Okay. So we've got three people here. This guy, and this guy. Actually, this might be a woman. This person's saying, wow, I'm really glad I'm in the front. I can hear, I can pay attention to this message. We need to see, of all these three people, who has the ability to pay attention and to stay focused, and who is motivated to pay attention, stay focused, and not distracted. Okay. And so here, this person right here, man, I'm right up front. I can hear him. I'm motivated. I'm listening. This person is like, wow, that's so interesting. This person here, I can't wait to hear more about what this person has to say. They're like on the edge of their seat. They're like, wow, this is amazing. Okay. Now, these people right here, okay, they are going to be more likely, because they have the ability and motivation to pay attention. They have the more likely to be persuaded by the central route. Okay. And this is if the argument is compelling and they're paying attention and they're convinced because they're thinking logically and they're like, you know what? I think this is right. Okay. I never thought of that before. That's a really excellent point. It's a really compelling message. The result is this attitude change, which is long lasting and very resistant to change because it is rooted deeply into that person's sort of psyche. Okay. So think of it that way. The central route, you have really been following, you're really motivated to listen, you're really interested in it, and you're convinced. Okay. Now, that's going to lead to long lasting and change and more resistant to somebody persuading you the other way. Okay. Now, let's say you have a group of people and they're not really motivated to listen. They're not really paying attention. They're easily distracted. Here, this person's obviously very bored. They're yawning. This person's like, God, it is like really hot in this room. Okay. So this person's droning on and I'm really hot and is just like, I'm sweating. Right. This person right here is, I got to go to the bathroom. All I can think about is not like peeing myself. Right. This person right here is just saying this message is just way too long. Okay. Now, if this occurs where the person is distracted, they're not motivated, okay, then the more likelihood of them being persuaded is through the peripheral route. Okay. And these peripheral factors, right? Length of communication, where the attributes of the communicator, and that's the part that they're going to pay the attention to. And so what happens is, and so if the person is like attractive, if the speaker's attractive, if they were like, oh, wow, you know, this person really knows what they're talking about because they're talking and talking and talking, or this person right here, wow, this person's really friendly. I like this person. This person seems nice. Okay. Totally peripheral factors, like nothing to do with the actual message. What's going to happen is we're going to see attitude change. We're going to see persuasion take place, but it's temporary. It's not something that's really rooted in logical thought and, you know, motivated thinking. It is essentially really susceptible to being persuaded again later on in another persuasive communication. So these kinds of peripheral route to persuasion, that is not a very effective way to get people to change their attitudes because it is very non-resistant to change and it is a very temporary thing. Here, another interesting sort of set of factors that we can think about here is, so we have this group right here. This is the thing relevant to you? Okay. So think about this. Let's say, you know, you're 19, 20 years old and we have somebody come on campus who's going to give a talk about retirement. And they're going to give a talk about what you should be doing when you're 45 years old. How many of you think that you would want to attend a talk like this? So if I were to force you to sit and listen to a topic that's not relevant to you, that's going to change the likelihood of you actually listening and how you value and think about the strength of the argument and how you think about who that person is who's giving the argument. Okay. When an issue is personally relevant. So this is this graph right here, high personal relevance. When the issue is personally relevant to you, what happens is that people are going to pay attention to the argument in the speech, and they're going to be persuaded to the extent that the argument is sound. You are paying attention to the argument and you're paying attention to how strong that argument is. Okay. So you care more about the strength of the argument, right? And you're going to rate an argument stronger no matter who the person is giving the argument. So that person could be somebody who does not have a lot of expertise, but because you are listening to the details of the argument and the logical part of the argument, you care more about the argument than who is making it. So you will be able to pick out A person who's presenting as an expert, but they have a really weak argument, you're going to be less likely to agree with that person because you've recognized, I don't care that that person claims that they're a doctor and that they know all these things. What they're saying doesn't make sense. So I don't agree with what they say. So even if the person presents as an expert, if you're highly invested in the argument and if it's highly personally relevant to you, you're going to pay more attention to the argument in of itself. Here, you can have somebody who is really not an expert, but if they have a really strong argument and you're listening to the strengths of their argument, you are going to rate that as, I agree with that because I don't care that this person has no background. What they're saying is relevant and important, and you're going to be more likely to be persuaded by that message. Now, on the flip side, if you have low personal relevance, okay, if the topic that you are listening to is not very relevant to you, people are going to pay less attention to the argument itself. They're not going to be thinking logically about the argument. They're going to take a mental shortcut. And what that is people who are deemed experts and present themselves as experts probably know what they're talking about, right? So if you have somebody come in and talk about retirement and you're like, I don't really care about this. They seem to know what they're talking about. You're going to be more likely to agree with them than if that topic was more personally relevant to you. And that's going this peripheral rule and mental shortcut of prestigious speakers, they can be trusted. What makes people take the central route? So, what we refer to this as need for cognition. So, this is also a personality variable. So not only is this something that is situational based, context based. So do you feel hot? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Are you uncomfortable? Okay. That's a sort of context situational based. There's also a personality variable in here. And that's what we refer to as this need for cognition. Do you enjoy engaging in things that are effortful, cognitively speaking? Do you enjoy engaging in activities that make you think? And if you are the person that says, I don't feel like I enjoy thinking, I don't like to think really hard about stuff, right? Then you have a low need for cognition. And then you're going to be more likely to rely on peripheral cues. If you're the type of person that really enjoys a challenging thought process and you say, I really, really enjoy thinking about and arguing points, and I really think about how compelling this argument is, and I think about the strength of the argument, then you have a high need for cognition. And that is a personality variable in which you are going to be more likely to form attitudes through the central route. So you can have a total audience. Some of them have a high need for cognition. Some of them have a low need for cognition. Some of them are going to take the central route. Some of them are going to take the peripheral route. You can actually have a person who has a high need for cognition, but they're not paying attention to the argument because they're distracted, they're tired, the topic isn't of interest or relevance to them. So even people who have high need for cognition, think about your own personal experience. Sometimes you just can't pay attention because there's other things going on, right? Because a lot of times because you're tired and you don't want to pay attention. So even though you might have that personality variable, you might actually still take a peripheral route because you don't have certain needs met, because you don't have the ability to pay attention or the motivation to pay attention for external factors. Really, in order to achieve this long-lasting attitude change, right, is you're going to need people who have the motivation and desire to listen. And you are going to, if you take the central route and you're motivated and it's relevant, you're going to be more likely to maintain the attitude. You're going to be more likely to behave consistently with the attitude, and you're going to be more likely to be resistant to other persuasive messages to try to get you to change your thought process. And so you want to achieve long-lasting attitude change, not temporary change. Now, the next few slides are things that we had talked about, specifically about fear arousing campaign. So I'm going to kind of move through this. This is the same information that we covered with smoking. We talked about the fact that you need to use moderate amounts of fear, but you also need an instruction on how to manage that fear. So we talked about this example here where we had people who were smoking, and those people who had instructions on how to quit smoking, along with this moderate amount of fear of what can happen if you continue smoking, resulted in a better attitude change. And also those behaviors lasted longer than just being scared or just getting some instructions on how to change your behaviors. So those are very important kind of things that we already covered. Now, the one thing that we didn't cover here is about how do we attempt to change a person's attitude? And is it important for us to understand what component that attitude is rooted in? So remember, we talked about the ABCs of attitude change, or attitudes, right? We talked about affective, emotionally based attitudes, behaviorally based attitudes, and cognitively based attitudes. And so even though you have attitudes that might be rooted in multiple components, so you have a particular thought process, you have behaviors associated with that, it may be rooted in one component over another, okay? And the best thing that you can do to engage in attitude change is to target the attitude component. So what we kind of call fight fire with fire, right? So if an attitude is cognitively based, the chances of you changing that attitude with rational arguments are much higher than if you try to do like an emotional campaign, right? If somebody is like, well, I'm only buying this car because this is great gas mileage and because it's, in my price range. Okay. If you are talking about a particular product, and then you try to then appeal to that person to get them to buy a different car by doing an emotional appeal, right? You say, oh, but if you go this way, this car is prettier and it's better for the environment. And, you love animals and you love the environment. That's actually going to be a harder sell than if you were to say, well, this car has better gas mileage and it's cheaper. You're going to be much more likely to change your attitude about that vehicle, because you're like, whoa, this caters to what this attitude is rooted in, right? Same thing with affectively based attitudes. If you have somebody who has a very strongly affectively based attitude, based in emotion, and then you try to use facts, you're not going to get anywhere. Okay. You need an emotional appeal. Fight fire with fire. It's the same idea of like people who have particular attitudes about vaccinations, for example. There are a lot of people that have a very emotionally based attitude about vaccinations. They don't really care about the facts. They just care about how they feel about it, right? And so educating people on the safety of vaccinations, that's not going to change their minds about vaccinations, because you need to do an emotional appeal. So an emotional appeal would be like, look at this child who didn't get vaccinated and they were severely ill because of a commonly vaccinated disease like measles. Maybe that child died. Maybe that child has a disability or got severely sick because of the fact that they just simply didn't get vaccinated. And so you can actually take this emotional appeal and show pictures and have a story, and you say, look at this scenario. And that is going to be much more likely to cause a person to change their attitude about vaccinations than if you were to give them a list of facts, a bunch of research articles, and a bunch of papers and facts about why they should think differently about vaccinations. And so you guys probably see this on like Facebook or Meta, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok all the time. When somebody's trying to get through to a particular group of people and say, you need to change your attitude about this, you know what works and what doesn't work. And so if you try an emotional appeal on something that isn't emotionally based, you're not going to have as much success as if you try a factual based appeal for a cognitively based attitude. Same thing with an affectively based attitude. You want an emotional appeal to get through to those individuals in terms of what they are thinking. This is an example of using advertisements, right, to get people to purchase certain items. So for example, if you have an advertisement that stresses the objective merits of a product, for example, this face cream is really well priced, it's very reliable. This window cleaner is very efficient, right? It'll clean your windows with no streaks. That is a ad that's going to appeal to a particular type of attitude, right? So if we talk about an advertisement that stresses the objective merits of the product, the price, the reliability, the efficiency, what kind of attitude component? Remember, it's ABC, there's only three. There's affective or emotion, there's behavioral, there's cognitive. What kind of attitude is an advertisement stressing merits of a product, price, reliability, efficiency, facts about the product? What kind of attitude is that going to be more effective on? What component than others? Yes, cognitive. So a cognitively based attitude is going to be much more likely to be swayed by things like price, reliability, efficiency of the actual product, right? Now, let's say you have ads that are stressing emotion and values. So this one is more likely to make you sexier, make you more attractive, to make you more youthful looking, to make you more accepted in your social group. What kind of advertisements is that targeting? Affective, very good, because affective attitudes, emotional attitudes are rooted in things like values and emotions, right? We actually can see this done on studies, right? In studies. And so this one right here is an advertisements that were stressing certain aspects of certain products. When you have a cognitively based attitude, okay, and that particular product is directed toward facts about the product, you're going to be more likely to think better about that particular product. So here, a cognitively based attitude about the product, all you care about is how much it costs. You care about what is the efficiency of that product. You're going to have much more favorable thoughts if the advertisements are targeting cognitively based facts. If the advertisement is targeting emotion, then you're going to have a lot less favorable thoughts. And then we can reverse this. A advertisement that is affectively, emotionally based, and you have an affective attitude toward it, then you're going to have much more favorable thoughts than if you had a cognitive, factual advertisement for an emotionally based attitude. So you want to make sure that, especially if you're going in advertisement, that you have matched the type of product with the right kind of ad. Okay. So you want to make sure that you do that so that you can sell more products, right? Now, we've already talked a lot about culture. So we've already gotten into Western versus Eastern culture. We've already talked about attitude inoculation. The only thing that I think that I have different here is I have a couple of more examples. These are all examples: Vio laptop, Apple iPad. Here we have Dick's Sporting Goods and Doritos. Remember that the more you look at and realize that products are in different things, then you're going to be much more resistant to, hey, I should buy that product because I saw it in that movie, or this character that I like uses this product. Here, another example, we have the Bee movie promoting Cinnabon. We have one of the Terminator movies promoting Pepsi. And then here we have Castaway, and that is Wilson, his volleyball person that he was talking to. That's an older movie. You guys might not have seen that. Now, we also see in movies and advertisements where they're actually not using the same product, but they're using so close because they don't have sponsorship that what product they're promoting. And we've seen this in the iCarly example that I gave in the last slide deck. Here is an example of what is this? Probably TED 2. I don't remember if this is TED 1 or TED 2. And then here he has bops, which are just like pops. Here we have I think these are donuts here. These are all off brands that are basically, you recognize the colors and the advertisement. So even though it's a fake product, it is actually showing you something that you're going to be familiar with. Whenever you're trying to get people to resist peer pressure, for example, because that peer pressure is going to really operate on the values and emotions of the person. That's just, they want to be liked and accepted by their peer group. So they're going to be more likely to do things like take a cigarette or take drugs from friends, or do something risky or do something dangerous because that is something that they want to be accepted by their group. And so they know it's not logical. It's not based on logical argument. They know that they're going to be more likely to do it because they want to be accepted by the group. And so in order to make adolescents more resistant to attitude change through peer pressure attempts is the same process of attitude inoculation. And so that is trying to get people to practice resisting peer pressure, which sounds kind of silly. And this is something that you might see people doing in different classes where it's like, okay, I'm pretending to give you a joint. What are you going to say? And so practicing with your kids of saying, oh, that's not for me, or whatever, can help them be more resistant to peer pressure. Reactance theory is when your attempts to get people to persuade people actually ends up backfiring on you and boomeranging. We call it reactance theory. So if you put on a toilet in a bathroom, you say, do not, in any reason, for any circumstance, write graffiti on this wall. What happens is that people react to that. And if you're trying to be persuasive and persuade them to stop writing on graffiti on the wall, but they feel like they're being threatened, they actually will not engage in what you want them to do. They'll actually go ahead and write graffiti on the wall. Whereas if you say something like, oh, please don't write on the wall, and you're very polite about it, they don't feel threatened. So it won't boomerang on you. It's the same thing when you try to tell people, don't smoke, don't do drugs, don't do this. They feel like their freedom and their personal choice is being affected. So like, for example, you might actually see this with masks. You might have seen this over the past 2 years. If you walk into a store, it says you must wear your mask versus please wear your mask, can actually get people to change the way that they actually respond to that. Final thing, the advertisements are very, very, very effective in persuading you to purchase, for example, products. And because a lot of times we're influenced by the emotional message of wanting to fit in. So for example, drink Pepsi because your friends are going to love you. There was a whole this is a really interesting thing right here. There's a whole ad campaign about bad breath and creating this idea that if you have bad breath, you're never going to get married, right? And so Listerine actually made something very personally relevant, this bad breath, playing on fears and insecurities and insecurities about personal relationships, and actually got people to purchase more items, more Listerine, because people were like, oh my goodness, I want to I want to get married, and so these can definitely be much, much more effective than you think. And then finally, also advertisements can create and further gender stereotypes, cultural stereotypes. Here we have, oh, this woman, she can paint. Oh, that don't get your hands dirty. We actually can see this was the Dove campaign was a really controversial campaign, because it was showing, like, for example, a dark-skinned woman washing her face and then becoming light-skinned. And that was, again, that imagery, not great. sending the wrong message, and then here making people mad because they're like, oh, I like Dr. Pepper, I'm a woman. And then so women get angry and they're like, well, this product isn't for me. And again, depicting men as doers, women as observers, these can be very subtle, but they can still sort of perpetuate stereotypes in both racial, ethnic, gender, all of those things. Final thing for today is about subliminal messages. And it turns out, so subliminal messages are things that you might not consciously really perceive. It turns out that there's really not a lot of evidence to say that subliminal messages really have that much of an impact. So hiding messages, there is a little bit of subliminal messaging in, like, for example, when you go to the theater and you watch a movie and then you see like the popcorn come out, and you're like, oh, you know what, I could eat some popcorn. That's more suggestive. Subliminal messaging is like, you don't even see it. It happens so fast that you don't consciously observe it. There's not a lot of evidence to say that actually works. This is an advertisement example. People for many years decades have been trying to find the breasts that are in the subliminal messaging that's in this drink. And really there's nothing there. There's no subliminal message there. There's not really, and this is again just making fun of it. There's not a lot of evidence to say that it actually exists. And then finally, this is just a review of the things that we talked about.